I'm delighted to be spending time with Jan and Susan, but in case you don't know who they are, I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. Jan, please will you start?
Hi. So, yes, I'm Jan, and I'm the leader of an organisation in New Zealand called Tautoko Options, and we've been on a journey transitioning to self management for just 3 years now. And yeah, it's been quite a journey.
We're looking forward to hearing more about that. Susan, who are you in relation to Jan?
So I'm Susan, also in New Zealand. About 3 years ago, yeah, I think it is just 3 years. Maybe it was November. It's December 2nd now when we're talking. I received a random note on LinkedIn from Jen Perkins, who I have a feeling was just Googling in LinkedIn teal coach, teal self-management, something in New Zealand, and my name popped up. And we had a very energizing first conversation. And she shared with me her vision of, as she was starting to move through her transition to retirement, that her very clear vision for, I guess, the succession planning in Tautoko Options would not be generic. It wouldn't be traditional, but it would be more of, her very clear sense that all of the capacity and capability existed within the organization for the purpose and the forward momentum to be carried by the participants, and not handed to another individual with the CEO title. And so that really intrigued me. And strangely enough, after our first conversation, I was doing a little bit more investigation into the company, and that's where I found that they are an HSA partner in New Zealand. So the connection between the three of us emerged and appeared quite early, and that was also very exciting for me.
Yes, absolutely. So Jan and I connected through HSA and have had the opportunity to connect and have lots of conversations through that. But if we start with Jan, self-management over the last 3 years, what would you like to bring our attention to first before I ask Susan what she's noticed that might be different about what you've done and how things have moved forward?
Yeah. I mean, I think Susan kind of kindly said that I had this clear vision, and I don't think I had a clear vision. I think I had an idea, I had a concept, I had an inkling that this could be different, that there were other ways for an organisation to be led than just with a traditional CEO, in that the organisation had a lot of special qualities that nobody wanted to lose, and that would be one of the dangers of actually just going down a traditional path and looking for somebody else to come in and take the lead role. And so I was just intrigued by this idea of teal and self-management, and it just sounded really different, exciting, and I guess that's always been what's called to me in doing things, is to take a leap forward and try something different that kind of lights a fire in you. So I had that excitement about it. And then I guess that the reality is that how you take that concept, how you take that idea, and then how you translate it to other people so that other people can actually come on board and engage. And we've got 130 people in the organisation, and so it's a lot of people to engage with. And so one of the kind of interesting parts really is the people who actually got it and came forward and have run quite easily with it. And then the people who have really struggled, and yeah, how you actually get that translated into people working together. And I think one of the things that I've noticed recently is that some of the things that I thought were really kind of obvious at the beginning have now only just started to kind of click with other people. So for the first time, actually, this week, I heard somebody else in the organization talking about the scaffold. And that was a kind of a concept that had sat with me right from the beginning, is that you have to create a scaffold that keeps everything together. And what could that look like? And we went from, in the early days, having a group that was called a scaffold group. and their that working group was supposed to be kind of envisaging what kind of scaffold could come together that would make this happen. And it didn't go anywhere. That group kind of that sort of floundered and just went round, and they, and so that kind of, we kind of parked that just kind of got parked. It went away for a while, and we just carried on. And then more recently, in trying to get the team leaders who kind of sit in a crucial role within the organisation, and have found it the hardest, the biggest struggle, trying to get them to actually come together. I talked about the cathedral in Spain, in Barcelona, and how the scaffolding around there, and how long it had taken to put that together, and how important scaffolding was in enabling people to build. And then unless you had a scaffold that was all joined up, then you go along with your barrow and whoops, there's a hole here, we can't get across. We've got to do something about this gap. And so for me, that I was trying to put across here an image of the reality of what a scaffold did and what its function might be, and the fact that we needed to look and say, have we got some gaps in the scaffold? And yes, and so how do we fill those? And so it's kind of like only more recently, I think, that people have understood that kind of concept, because I think it's just different language and how you translate it, and whether it has meaning for each individual or not. So we've got those parts. We've got one team that volunteered to be the fishbowl and say, we'll try it first. And they have, and and 3 years down the track, they're still the leaders in terms of their practice and how they're doing things differently, in the confidence within that team that has grown, and the ability for them to actually face new concepts, new ideas that might be bubbling up, and say, okay, yep, how would we do that? That's still there. And then we have pockets of things happening. But I guess that I'm now on this time frame of, we've said by 1 July next year, we'll be there. Mm-hmm. And where it's going to look like, I'm not sure at this point. But yeah, it's kind of noticing now, where are the gaps that need attention, and where are the areas of real potential to give some time and support to grow.
And when you say 1st of July next year, is that the transition period for you leaving the organisation?
It is.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Susan, what have you been noticing as you've been supporting Jan and the organisation?
Gosh, so many things. It's been such an amazing learning journey for me. I think probably the first thing that I noticed, so following my first couple of discussions with Jan, and then having a discussion with the board, and then I can remember the first meeting with what at that time was called the exec or the senior leadership team, and coming into that room and inviting the table that was in the middle of us to be removed so that we could be sitting in a way that we could all look at each other without any barriers. And if I'm honest, like the abject skepticism on most of the people's faces. I don't know if they were most skeptical about me or most skeptical about, oh, this is one of Jan's new harebrained ideas. But the willingness of that group to actually be in the work from that first meeting 3 years ago until now has been just unbelievable. And I think I embarrass them quite often when I acknowledge the change that I've seen in them, not only through this process of building the scaffolding and creating a different kind of organization, but for them personally. And a big belief I have about this work is that in order to even have a chance to create something different, we need to do that internal work to interrogate our limiting beliefs, interrogate and be willing to let go of beliefs that we've had around our value in work, and what the difference between what I can write on my CV and what actually I'm enacting in a way as a person and a human and as part of a community and organization is not for the faint-hearted, right? And I think that that's something that I've so appreciated and I've seen fall flat so many times, because it sounds like John said, it's an intriguing idea, but intriguing ideas just remain intriguing ideas unless the people are willing to go there. So that was one of the first things I noticed. And I think maybe the second thing I noticed, because we really did have quite a good, especially for the first couple of years, cadence of bringing the whole organization together to share this thinking, to create the conditions to set up the first working groups, to give everybody in the organization the opportunity to experience what self-management is like, what self-organization is like. And the thing that touched me from that very first week in New Zealand, we call meetings hui's, HUI, that very first hui in both in Palmerston North and in Nelson, was the absolute integration of people that they serve, right? So in that circle from the very beginning, it was not only an expectation, but a foregone conclusion that the people that they serve would participate in this process, that they would join working groups, that they would be on the journey alongside the people that support them and the people that support the people that support the people that receive services from Tautoga Options. And so for me, that was, oh gosh, what a beautiful, I don't even want to say opportunity, a beautiful manifestation of being willing to work together, hold each other, and support each other into this new way of being. I often say that it takes at least a year for the system itself to adapt to this new way of being. And there's many reasons for that. Just people don't quite believe it's true. People, I think for the first year, and this is something that I see in all organizations that I work with, is there will always be a group of people who think that the leadership has the answers, but is playing some kind of weird game with them that, we really know, but we're just kind of putting you through this pressurized situation of coming up with it because it's kind of part of the game or part of the thing. And it takes a while for the system to actually believe that, no, like, much of this is actually emergent. Much of this is sitting and waiting and seeing and organizing to see what the system actually needs. And I think the third thing that I'd say is that the patience of the system, and the real commitment to both the cadence and doing the work, something super unique about this organization.
So 3 things there that would terrify most change agents, I think. So one is starting with a conversation with directors and saying this is inner work and being really clear about this. Second is the expectation that, well, of course, the people we serve will also be involved. And 3 is the leaders don't have the answers. The change agents don't have the answers. We'll just have to see what happens. That's not typical work, is it? That sounds scary in lots of different ways. And Jan, you said that there are a number of different groups working this out with you, that the scaffolding group had a short shelf life and didn't get very far. But tell us what some of the other working groups have been. Please give me more of a flavour of what that was looking like.
I think one of the most significant working groups is probably the values, value group, that really dived into looking at what we had put together in terms of what we thought our values were as an organisation, and what did those phrases, those words really mean, and how did that translate into what we did? Was it relevant? Did it cover? Did we believe in it? Could we all sign up to it? All of those questions around. And so that group was probably one of the longest running working groups. And because our values have been expressed in Te Reo, because that's the other official language in New Zealand, and it's about our approach to working together with tangata whenua, there was a lot of kind of having people to get their heads around translating the language and the concepts between. And yeah, I mean, that was a huge kind of growth area, really, because what it challenged, and that's kind of about that inner work, because what it challenged was, each person, how did they actually feel about this concept of biculturalism and this concept of partnership within, which is huge, huge. And so everybody would have their own kind of position where they were on that, and their own, sort of prejudices and worries about, that. And so yeah, but some great work was done by that group, and some really good input from people who were receiving services who were Māori, who created. So we started off, and we had 3 areas of value, but there was a different concept that grew out of the conversations, and they came up with a Māori concept, which was a hurutanga, which was the concept that was brought forward when they were talking about safe place. And it was, so that has become for everybody now, when we talk about feeling safe and having a safe place to actually talk and come together, and we talk about hurutanga, and it translates to that whole concept of psychological safety, but in a different way as well, and a bit of a different dimension. And so yeah, so that was a huge unexpected thing that happened, and then that group decided, okay, so yes, we think we've articulated and brought together what we think the values are and what that means in practice, and we've come up some examples of that, but how do we make this live? How do we make this, it's not like we've done that piece of work, let's put it to one side, how do we make it carry forward? And so then the crew said, okay, we're going to create a set of cards, and so that people can actually carry them around in their bags, in their pockets. So the values are always there. They can always take it out. There's cards on a little ring, and you know, they can use them to reflect on. They can pull them out in a meeting, you know, and or when they're working with a person, and it's just, you know, let's encourage, let's give everybody a set, and let's encourage them to keep refreshing with them. And then also ideas like when we do check-ins at meetings, let's pick one of our values, and let's check in around that value. Well, you know, what have we seen? What have we noticed? What have we been doing? And so, you know, just making that a theme sometimes. And then some teams have actually appointed people in that role of a values monitor to actually, you know, just notice within that particular team or within that particular meeting, you know, what are the values that are happening that we're putting into practice here, or what are the areas of concern that are arising here about values. So that was a really successful working group. Yes.
And what about the very practical things like finance and health and safety? How did you get to grips with the changes that would need to emerge in those areas?
The finance area was another really good area where example of kind of change happening, because first of all, it was the service kind of leads who had usually had access to the information about budgets and how we're tracking and things like that. So we put together a finance team. We asked for people who were interested, who liked looking at figures and analysing figures, and that was something they could get their heads into, that they were wanting to make sure that the organisation stayed viable and that they had some passion about that. And so we got together a team of people who became the finance team, and that finance team has been running very successfully for the last 2 years. So that started off, you know, more like a working group, but soon became an ongoing team. And so they created a new finance policy. They made a team plan. They set the goals. They meet every fortnight. The profit and loss reports will go monthly to that team to look at and to raise any questions around. They then went on to look at the concept of remuneration. Mm-hmm. And that was a biggie, because it was, okay, like, you know, how do we move beyond having somebody decide how much a person gets paid to, as an organisation, deciding, you know, how do we spend our resources. So we have created now a remuneration team, which is a subset of the finance team. So we came up with a remuneration process whereby if people thought that their remuneration should change, they could put forward a proposal to a team, and that team would get together with that person and make a decision. Now, that's very, very much in its infant stage now. So the remuneration team has representatives from across the 2 islands and from across different role areas. And they've only just kind of worked out how they're going to function and how they're going to get their heads around this. And I think they're about to look at the first proposal that's been sent to them. So so they're quite anxious about how that will be. But yeah, that's quite a big one. That's quite a big one. So that team makes decisions about anything that comes up where people might want to spend, not the remuneration team, but the finance team. If people want to purchase something or spend some money on something that's outside of the budget, they can come to that team and they can put forward a proposal, and that team will make a decision on that. One of the interesting things that came to that team was we had a process of remunerating people for their mileage when they use their cars, and it came from one of the geographic teams brought forward. We think there should be a remuneration for people who ride bikes, and so that was actually again a big discussion. And again, it's that kind of, it's going back into that inner work, because all the people who were looking at that decision, there was the people who do ride bikes and the people who think this is good for, the carbon footprint and it's good for well-being and all that. So there's all that. And then there was people who like, but my cars are very precious to me, and I spend a lot of money on it, and I've never ridden a bike and I wouldn't want to. So I don't have that same opinion about bike riding. And so that was a really interesting one for people to actually move beyond, what their personal ideas around bike riding was, into, is it a fair and equitable thing to remunerate people for using their bikes to get between people they support them. And they did come to a decision in the end, but that was, so that group was, then we have a service development and advice team, and that's probably the most slightly unformed at this stage still, not quite clear what's in its remit and what isn't. So tend to be at the moment, a lot of things go to the, where should we take this? Oh, service development and advice. And it's perhaps a little kind of unclear as to how much that team can actually be expected to do, and can't do that. But I guess they would replace more what you would see in terms of a strategic planning group with in a traditional structure.
And Jan, tell me a bit about how teams decide how they're going to work together. So what a lot of teams call team agreements, and how those get agreed and reviewed. What have you been trying and learning about that?
Yeah, so we did start off by looking at the templates that have been used by the wellbeing teams, and also by the organisation in Perth.
Avigo, yes.
Avigo, yes. And they had some templates they were using, so we looked at those, and I guess what came together was a slight mix of the two, in terms of, so each team as it's formed has looked at setting its purpose, and looked at what its goals were that it was working on, how they wanted to be together, how they wanted to behave and communicate with each other, what they needed to know about communication preferences for each other, and how to support each other. They've come up with their one-page kind of profile for their team, what they appreciate about their team, and what's important to their team, and how to support each other. So the team plans, most teams, I guess it's probably the team leaders who are still formulating, that haven't got a clear team plan at the moment, but other teams have got their team plans. And then what we're just trying to grapple with now is that maybe that we can take from each team plan the top 3 goals that they're working on, and look at those each year and say, okay, let's pull those out and let's look at how that gives strategic direction to the whole of the organization, and let's look at how we can maybe take that as something we share with the board about what we're working on, and then we can look at, and how have we gone, let's review where have we got to with those goals. So the board is another team in the sense that is changing and is moving from being a traditional board to actually operating as a team, and not just kind of showing up as a group of individuals who are doing a role. And they're probably still at the moment just kind of like, oh, well, my role here is to be the chair, my role here is to be the treasurer, my role here is to take the minutes. But, just trying to get their heads around how, as a team, we show up here and how we share the work in perhaps a different way again, rather than having those traditional roles. Yeah.
Thank you. Let's pull Susan back in. Susan, conversations we've had in the past is noticing that many organisations that make the transition that Jan's involved in lose a significant number of their colleagues. That's not been the case here. Tell me a bit about that, and what do you think is underneath that?
It's quite surprising, isn't it? Right. So there are certainly people in the organization who, from time to time, start to feel like the edges of their comfort with this new way of working, and some of them can, feel safe enough to push through that, and some still keep those barriers up. And I think that the interesting thing is, because Jan and I have had pretty frank conversations about some of the people in the organization who are actually even sometimes quite vocal about the fact that, no, I actually prefer the old way. But there's something in Tautoko options that keeps them there. So I think that, from my perspective, or what I would, I guess, like as an advisor, what I advise is as long as those people aren't actively sabotaging, is there space and room for people at different comfort levels with the system to still be in the system. And I think that that's probably true, but I also think that that's not something that you can take for granted. I think that especially with people that had previously been in a position of authority or power over others, the tendency to want to kind of hold on to that for all the number of reasons we know that people like to hold on to power, whether it's the only place in their lives they feel like they have control, and so they enact that in the workplace, to what we were talking about earlier around, thinking about careers more traditionally. Like, if I can't say on my CV that I manage X amount of people, then how am I ever going to get the next job with the next pay rise? And just, I think that the patience and the consistency is one of the reasons that there hasn't been an exodus. But I mean, maybe it's more simple than that. Maybe the core elements or ingredients of a healthy culture and a healthy level of love and trust in the organization was already there before this big transformation happened. I think that I have an inkling around that as well. Yeah, it's just been super, super interesting. And I also think that I don't think that anybody in the organization could say that they feel that there has been backward momentum around really living into these new ways of being, around transparency and around everybody having a voice and around equity of ideas and around the ability to make proposals and around the opportunity to be involved in decisions that impact one's work. And I don't know, it sounds a little bit like pithy to say it, but if we create that scaffolding in those conditions, people will be on a different trajectory and time scale. But from a true sense of well-being in work, I think that there is something here that's important and significant, but is hard and takes a long time.
What do you think, Jen?
Sorry,
Oh,
what do you think, Jen? Why do you think that there hasn't been like the 20% exodus?
I think because the reason that people are doing the work that they're doing is because they're passionate about the work that they do, and they are committed to the support they provide to people, and it's not something that that they're going to easily walk away from. So it's like, yeah, that yeah, that's okay. They may not feel as comfortable about some of the changes that are happening, but you know, this concept of person-centered has been there way before we did this, and so and that still sits integral. Like it's very hard to differentiate our person-centered work from our self-managing work. You can't, you know, and it's the two things are integrated. And I think that's kind of what we've kept going back to, you know, but we all have our one-page profiles. We all have our ways of supporting each other, and this is just growing the concept across the whole organization in a slightly different way. So I think that's when there was a really nice moment actually this week where one of the people who has struggled and quite vocalized that actually, you know, the old way was pretty good, and why we're doing this, you know, weren't we doing a good job anyway? And I had deliberately kind of thrown down a challenge, which is a weru in Maori, and said, okay, here's the challenge, you know, this team needs to come together, and because we need it to be together and we need it to do this work. And this one person was like, no, I don't think so. But I put down the weru and I wrote that, you know, here's the weru and you need to pick it up before the end of the year. And within that group, this one person who'd really vocalized was the person that stepped forward and said, okay, let's meet, let's do it. And yeah, and I had a conversation with her this week, and she said, oh yes, you know, when you put down that weru, you know, I felt really prickly about that. I felt really oof. But then I thought, okay, we'll go for it. And then, you know, we were kind of like, we were beyond, we'd moved beyond that challenge. We were now, you know, on the same playing field in terms of, yeah. And you know, sometimes I think, or what I've realized recently is that you have to, two things, you have to give people permission to change and say you can do it differently, and sometimes you have to lay down a challenge and say this needs to happen, how are you going to do it? And yeah, and that's quite a tricky balance between giving directives. Yeah. Yeah, but I think that helps people. That helps people to actually engage and move forward. In Susan talked about patience, but I think within myself there is an element of tenacity that's something that I'm going to give up on, you know. And so even if I have to keep saying things over and over, I will keep doing that, you know, because I'll keep saying, no, I believe this is going to be better. Let's do it.
Those are great examples of leadership, both of noticing and commenting and supporting people to move forward. And again, one of the myths of self-management is there's no leadership and everybody steps back. But Jan, that also feels like a great place to pause this conversation and pick it up again, to hear more of, given how you've got to where you are now, you've got 6 months, to hear how you're thinking about that and what might emerge. So Susan, any final reflections before we sum up for tonight? Or this morning?
Or this morning. No, just super grateful. I'm really excited that there's going to be part 2 of this conversation, because Totoga Options is really just leading in so many areas of what I call sort of the advanced scaffolds around things like roles and accountabilities, and how we do self-initiated performance reviews, and even in talking about next time with Jan stepping back, what about the passing on or distributing of the less tangible elements of leadership? Because I think that this is where the rubber is going to hit the road in the next few months, around who's going to pick up that mantle of what Jan just articulated in terms of the tenacity, the support, the continuing to create and nurture the conditions for this amazing transformation to continue.
Lovely. So to be continued. Thank you so much, Jan and Susan, and looking forward to our next conversation.